Well, good afternoon, everyone. As we all fully well know, the most significant occurrence during the previous recess was the death of Justice Scalia. Many of us had our own interaction with Justice Scalia over the years. In my own case, I was a young staffer in the Justice Department back during the Ford administration, and I'd get to go to staff meetings where I kept my mouth shut because I was in the presence of Robert Bork, who was the Solicitor General, Lawrence Silberman, who was the Deputy Attorney General, and Nino Scalia, who was head of the Office of Legal Counsel, three of the most brilliant conservative lawyers of our time. And Silberman, of course, ended up being on the D.C. Circuit, Scalia on the Supreme Court, and Bork was nominated for the Supreme Court. When I came to the Senate a number of years later, I was on the Judiciary Committee when Scalia was nominated. And like a lot of conservatives, have watched him over the years with great admiration. So clearly, this was an extraordinary individual and a great loss for the country. The question immediately becomes, what's the way forward? And as you all know, I have the view, and expressed it early on, that the next president should make this nomination. That certainly is supported by precedent. You'd have to go back to 1888 when Grover Cleveland was in the White House to find the last time a Senate of a different party from the president confirmed a nominee for the Supreme Court in an election year. In 1988, Justice Kennedy in early '88 was confirmed, but that was a vacancy created 6 months before that, to which Bork was nominated and subsequently defeated. Ginsburg was nominated and subsequently withdrew. The vacancy had existed for quite some time prior to the presidential election. So the question is, who should make the decision? And my view, and I can now confidently say the view shared by virtually everybody in my conference, is that the nomination should be made by the president the people elect in the election that's underway right now. In fact, we've had 3 of them already in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. There's one going on today in Nevada. The election is well underway. So I believe the overwhelming view of the Republican Conference of the Senate in the Senate is that this nomination should not be filled, this vacancy should not be filled by this lame duck president. That was the view of Joe Biden when he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in 1992. Chuck Schumer, who I assume will be my counterpart next year, had the view that you shouldn't fill a vacancy in the last 18 months going into a presidential election year, and certainly that was Senator Reid's view as well in a different era. So I think that's where this will end up. I expect the president will make a nomination. Senator Cornyn is on the Judiciary Committee, and I'd like for him to take over now and address another aspect of all of this.
The Majority Leader was reminiscing a little bit about his experience with Justice Scalia. I've met him when he administered the oath of office to me in 1991 on the Texas Supreme Court. So many of us have our own personal memories of this giant in the law and somebody who really has transformed the Supreme Court and its jurisprudence and I think set a high standard for those who follow. Today, the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee on the Republican side unanimously have agreed. We wrote a letter to Senator McConnell saying we are of the view that there should not be a hearing in the Judiciary Committee for anyone that the president nominates. The reason for that is because it's not about the personality, it's about the principle. The principle being that it's up to the American people in this next election, no matter who they choose, to make the nomination for this important seat on the Supreme Court. Justice Scalia served for 30 years, so this clearly extends far beyond President Obama's term of office. It's that important. And as Senator McConnell said, we have some precedent. Well, actually, we have 3 things. We have the Biden rule, we have the Reid dictum, and the Schumer precedent. all in which they essentially tore up the rule book. So there isn't any rule book anymore other than the way they've rewritten the rules. And this is the right thing for us to do, and this is going to be our path forward.
Just last November, the President signed into law legislation that forbid the closing of Guantanamo Bay and transporting of detainees there anywhere in the United States. That was something that was sent to him by both Republicans and Democrats. And what he is now proposing to do is in direct contradiction with the will of the American people, and it's the will of the American people and their voices that need to be heard. And that's the point that we are making with respect to this Supreme Court vacancy as well, that a lame duck president should not be making a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. The American people deserve to have their voices heard in this process, and they will have that opportunity in the election this year, which, as the leader pointed out, is already well underway. The next president of the United States, be it a Democrat or a Republican, should be making that nomination. And we believe that that's the way that this process should proceed, and as was pointed out earlier, that is the view of the Republican Senate, and we think it's the view of the American people.
Well, I want to first thank Senator McConnell for his leadership on the whole issue of the death of Justice Scalia and the decision to be made by the American people, the voters in November, not by a lame duck president to make a lifetime appointment. I also want to mention this hearing this morning in the Foreign Relations Committee with Secretary of State Kerry. It was specifically related to Syria. When Secretary Kerry came for his confirmation hearings 3 years ago, about 60,000 Syrians had been murdered. Here we are 3 years later. At the time, he said the situation was getting worse. Here we are 3 years later. The number is now 470,000 killed. So in those 3 years, that's an average of over 300 Syrians killed every day since Secretary Kerry has taken over as Secretary of State. The strategy of this administration is not working. What we're seeing now is Russia is actively involved on the ground in Syria. They say they're there to fight terrorists. For them, that is an elastic term. We know who they're after, and even though they recently announced a ceasefire, after announcing the ceasefire, they completely and viciously destroyed 2 hospitals in Aleppo, sending a message to those on the ground that it's time to get out. We're having civilians are terrorized and terrified. They're leaving. For people who want to stay as part of the resistance, they see the price to pay is very high. Now the White House, as well as the Russians, have announced a new ceasefire, but not to take effect for a couple of weeks. I will tell you once again, that is a charade. It is a smokescreen. It is time for a new strategy. The Secretary of State today admitted in the committee that there are no consequences to be paid by Russia when they violate the ceasefire again.
Thank you. The reason I'm part of this stakeout from time to time is that I'm the elected representative of my colleagues in the Senate re-election campaigns this year. And in that respect, a number of you have asked me in the last day or two what effect the Supreme Court nomination might have on our chances in November. Let me just say that we are very comfortable letting the American people speak on this issue. The American people will choose a president in November, and they'll get a choice between a president that is likely to appoint someone in the tradition of Justice Scalia, or a president who is more likely to appoint the type of nominees that we've seen from President Obama. Elections have consequences, and the election this November will have consequences as to the type of Senate we have and as to our being disposed to confirm nominees in the vein of Justice Scalia, or the American people, if they so choose, could choose a Senate that will be delighted to have overly liberal and expansionist justices. I think that we really should be calm and matter of fact about this. we know from the statements made by our friends on the other side of the aisle that if they were in the position that we hold today, the result would be exactly the same. The Vice President said as much in 1992. The future Democratic leader said as much in 2007, and clearly that would have been the attitude of Senator Reid also. So I think we've got work to do. If the President sends us a nominee, I think that it will be disposed of as the Vice President would have disposed of that nominee had he been in the leadership, had Senator Schumer been in the leadership. And we need to get on with the many other legislative matters that we have to attend to this year.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah, Manu.
It sounds like the president will still nominate someone. Can you talk about how far you're willing to go in preventing this nominee from going forward? As you know, the first step is often courtesy calls with each senator. Will you actually not meet with the nominee?
Well, look, I don't know how many times we need to keep saying this. The Judiciary Committee has unanimously recommended to me that there be no hearings. I've said repeatedly, and I'm now confident my conference agrees, that this decision ought to be made by the next president, whoever is elected. I don't know the purpose of such a visit. I would not be inclined to take one myself.
And Senator Cornyn, would you not either meet with a nominee?
I don't see the point of going through the motions. If we know what the outcome is going to be and we are united on that, I don't see the point of going through the motions and creating a misleading impression that something else is going on here.
Senator McConnell, why would not your friend Judge Gregg talked to him yesterday? He said that it'd be perfectly defensible for Republicans to have hearings and vote against a nominee who's out of the mainstream, but that if you don't even have hearings, it could be a political issue. Pete King on the House side said that voting down a nominee is fine, but if you don't have hearings, it looks like Republicans are trying to hide something or are afraid of something. My question is, do you feel you're taking any sort of political gamble here?
You know, I have many faults, but getting off message is not one of them. This nomination will be determined by whoever wins the presidency in the fall. I agree with the Judiciary Committee's recommendation that we not have hearings. In short, there will not be action taken.
Senator McConnell, why not, though, if through...
One part of Biden said that his work was misconstrued from 1992, and that it was not an accurate description of his views from 1992. Senator Schumer said that it doesn't matter what he said in the past or anybody else.
I know they say it doesn't matter what they said in the past. I think Senator Wicker summed it up rather well. We know what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot. We know what would happen. A nominee of a Republican president would not be confirmed by a Democratic Senate when the vacancy was created in a presidential election year. That's a fact. And some of their statements in the past are very inconvenient now, and I'm sure they would like to suggest that they didn't really mean it. But let me try one more time. The Judiciary Committee has unanimously recommended there be no hearings. I agree with that. And number two, this nomination will be filled by the next president elected in November.
Senator McConnell, every pending nominee over the last century has at least gotten a vote. What's the harm in the Senate voting on a potential nominee?
I'm just going to say the same thing again. Paul?
Yes, Senator. The next president, are you committing that that president will get, whoever that president is, will get an up or down vote on that nominee?
No, what I'm saying is whoever the nominee is that comes up next year will be considered by the Senate. You know, what the procedure, the process would be, I don't know, but at the beginning of a 4-year term, the suggestion that a Senate of either party wouldn't consider the nominee at all would not be correct. But we're talking about here an election already underway, a vacancy created in a presidential election year. Next year is not a presidential election year. This is a unique circumstance, and you'd have to go back to 1888 when Grover Cleveland was president to find the last time a vacancy created in a presidentially elected year was approved by a Senate of a different party. I think you all understand where we are.
Senator McConnell, when does the election season begin? It's been, people started campaigning in Iowa last year.
We are in the election year. It will occur this November. The vacancy occurred this election year. That's what we're talking about.
Are you concerned about?
Thanks, everybody.